Welcome to Signal Ahead. I'm Alfred. Today's briefing, Cryptography Academic, Tuesday, July 21. This is the synthesis above the noise, not the headlines, but the deep currents beneath them. Let's get into it. Welcome. Let me begin with something that, if you've only been following the headlines, you would almost certainly have missed. When we talk about cryptography and security today, the instinct is to imagine mathematics, hard problems, lattices, prime factorization, the elegant machinery that turns intractability into trust. And that world is very much alive. There's beautiful work being done right now on lattice-based signatures that let you withdraw a signature without revealing who signed it, on secure aggregation protocols for federated learning that eliminate the need for a central server to shuffle sensitive shares between users. Real cryptographic craftsmanship, the kind that has defined the field for 40 years. But here is the non-obvious thing. The center of gravity in security research has quietly shifted away from the mathematics of secrets and towards something far messier, the semantics of instructions. The dominant threat is no longer someone breaking your encryption. It is someone writing a sentence that your system obeys when it shouldn't. And that is a profound change, because cryptography was always premised on a clean separation between data and control, between the message and the machinery that processes it. That separation is now dissolving in front of us. Consider what it means that an artificial intelligence coding assistant will read a project's setup documentation, a README, a requirements file, an innocuous makefile, and then dutifully install whatever dependencies that document names without checking the source, the version, or even whether the package name is real. Documentation, of all things, becomes a vector for code execution. The attacker doesn't need to touch your code. They edit your instructions, and the truly unsettling finding is that the very same model, given the very same attack, will catch it through one tool harness and blithely install it through another. The vulnerability isn't in the mathematics. It isn't even reliably in the model. It lives in the plumbing between them. That pattern, the collapse of the boundary between trusted instruction and untrusted content, repeats everywhere you look across the current work. There's a lovely, sinister phrase for one version of it: passive prompt injection. Picture a security operations center where analysts feed network logs into a language model to summarize threats. An adversary embeds a malicious instruction inside a log-generating field, a username, a header, a request path. That payload sits quietly in storage. Weeks later, an analyst runs a routine query, the model ingests the poisoned log as context, and the instruction executes. The attack was planted long before, and the defender triggers it themselves. The log, which was always just data, has become a command, and it gets more durable still. When agents are given persistent memory files, behavioral preferences, knowledge bases that survive across sessions, that memory becomes a place where corruption can lie dormant. The research here is careful and honest about it. It is genuinely hard to get an agent to overwrite its own memory using external content. But once a payload is already planted in that memory, it wields real influence over future behavior. So we now have a taxonomy of memory poisoning that runs from direct single-record corruption up to context-triggered dormant corruption malice that waits for the right conversational trigger, like a sleeper agent in the system's own recollection. Notice what all of this does to our inherited definition of a security breach. Penetration testing was built to answer one question: can an adversary compromise infrastructure, the software, the configuration, the operational controls? That question is still necessary, but the field is now arguing persuasively that it is no longer sufficient, because in these AI-enabled systems, the adversary need not compromise any infrastructure at all. They can leave the machine perfectly intact and simply alter what it decides to do by shaping a prompt, a retrieved document, a sensor reading, a tool response. The relevant failure is no longer resource compromise. It is behavioral objective violation. The system does exactly what it was built to do, mechanically flawlessly, and produces a harmful outcome. So here is the argument I want to build across our time together. First, that security has become a problem of context rather than ciphers, that the frontier has moved from protecting secrets to governing behavior under adversarial input. Second, that this shift forces us to rethink evaluation itself. It is no longer enough to ask whether an agent can succeed at a task, Because in operational reality, every reasoning step, every tool call, every query costs something, and capability under an infinite budget tells you very little about the real world. And third, that the old mathematical discipline hasn't vanished. It has retreated to become the bedrock beneath a far larger and more fragile structure, one whose weakest points are now overwhelmingly linguistic and architectural rather than numerical. Let us start, then, where the money and the danger have moved, not with the unbreakable cipher, but with the sentence the machine could not help but believe. There is a temptation, when one surveys a week's worth of work in a field like this, to treat it as whether a scatter of independent storms, each with its own name and its own patch of sky. A side-channel result here, a differential privacy refinement there, a lattice signature scheme in the corner. And if you read only the titles, that is what you get: noise and atomized business. But I want to suggest that beneath this particular week, there runs a single deep current, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The current is this. For roughly 40 years, the discipline organized itself around a beautifully clean question. Can an adversary who does not possess the secret nonetheless recover it, or forge it, or read it? Whole magnificent edifice, the reductions, the security games, the proofs that this problem is as hard as that one was built to answer that question with rigor. And notice what it assumes. It assumes a boundary. There is the system and there is the attacker, and between them a wall, and the wall is made of mathematics. The attacker throws ciphertext at the wall. The wall, if we have done our sums correctly, does not yield. What the present moment reveals is that the wall has quietly dissolved. Not because the mathematics failed. The lattice constructions in this corpus are as careful as ever. The reasoning about signer anonymity until claim, about queuing stability in a watermarking channel, about the counterdependent budget in a private histogram, all of it is the old rigor, undiminished. The wall dissolved because the systems we now build no longer have an inside and an outside. They have a throat. They swallow. Consider what unites the noisier-looking papers here. An agent reads a README and installs whatever the documentation names, without asking who wrote the documentation. An agent maintains a memory file across sessions, and an instruction planted in that file in June governs its behavior in September. A security operations center pipes network logs into a language model, and the logs, which are simply whatever an external service chose to emit, carry instructions that execute when the analyst asks an innocent question. A retrieval system pulls in a document whose privacy risk is not a fixed property but depends entirely on what the user happened to ask. In every case, the sensitive boundary is not a cryptographic key. It is the moment of ingestion. The threat is not that someone breaks in. It is that we have built a mouth that cannot distinguish food from poison, and we keep feeding it from the street. This is why one paper reframes penetration testing itself. The old paradigm asked, can the adversary compromise the resource, the server, the configuration, the credential? And that question remains necessary. But it is no longer sufficient, because in these systems an adversary need not touch the infrastructure at all. He alters the prompt, the retrieved passage, the tool description, the human-in-the-loop interaction, and the behavior bends while the machine remains, in every classical sense, uncompromised. The objective is violated, the resource is intact. This is a genuinely new category of harm, and our vocabulary is only beginning to catch up. Now and here is the turn. Notice that the same current runs the other way as well. The defense has also grown a throat. If you build an agent to emulate an adversary automatically from a threat intelligence report, generating and executing and revising its own playbooks, you have automated the attacker precisely by giving him a mouth of his own. And once the attacker is a language model consuming reports, the malware learns to look for the artifacts of that consumption, the model caches, the assistant configuration directories, the local inference services, and falls silent when it detects them. Evasion, which used to hunt for the fingerprints of the virtual machine, now hunts for the fingerprints of the analyst's own intelligence. The observer's tools have become the observed's tell, so the deep current is not AI arrives in security. That is the surface reading, and it flatters no one. The deep current is a migration of the trust boundary away from the key, which we knew how to reason about, and toward the context, which we do not. Cryptography spent decades learning to make a secret uninferable from what an adversary sees. It never had to make a system safe against what an adversary says, because systems did not, until recently, act on what they were told by strangers. And that is why I find the same model different outcome, finding the most quietly alarming thing in the whole set. The identical model catches the attack through one harness and installs it through another. The security is not in the model. It is in the plumbing around the mouth, which means our proofs, however sound, no longer terminate where the danger lives. The rigor has not left us. It has simply been standing guard at a door that the traffic now routes around. There's a temptation, when you survey a body of work like this, to organize it by the flavor of threats: supply chain over here, side channels over there, privacy leakage in the corner. But the more instructive way to read what's arrived is to notice a single shape recurring across otherwise unrelated papers. Again and again, the vulnerability lives not in a component, but in a boundary, and specifically in the assumption that some boundary is trustworthy simply because it has always been ceremonial. Consider the coding agent that reads a README, dutifully installs what the documentation lists, and in doing so executes an attacker's redirection to a poisoned registry. Nothing was hacked in the old sense. The documentation was the payload. For decades, a setup instruction was inert prose, a suggestion to a human who exercised judgment somewhere between reading and typing. Automate away that judgment, and the prose becomes code. The same pattern haunts the Security Operations Center, where an analyst pastes network logs into a language model for triage, unaware that an adversary has written an instruction into a log field that will be obediently executed on retrieval. And it haunts agent memory, where a payload planted in a persistent file quietly steers behavior across sessions. In each case, a channel we treated as descriptive has become imperative. That is the second-order implication worth sitting with. The collapse of the distinction between data and instruction, which we thought we had solved in the era of buffer overflows, has returned wearing the costume of natural language. What makes this genuinely difficult, rather than merely a fresh list of bugs, is that the defense can no longer be located cleanly. One of these studies makes the point with uncomfortable precision. The same model catches an attack through one harness and installs it through an. The intelligence is constant, the outcome is not. Security has migrated out of the artifact and into the plumbing, the scaffolding, the orchestration, the harness. We are accustomed to asking whether a model is safe. That question is becoming almost meaningless in isolation. The honest question is whether a particular assembly model, tools, memory, retrieval, permissions is safe, and that answer is emergent, not inherited. It resists the audit culture that certifies a component once and trusts it thereafter. You can watch this reframing happen explicitly in the work on penetration testing for AI-enabled systems. The classical goal was resource compromise. Can the adversary seize the machine, the credentials, the network? The proposed successor is behavioral objective violation. Can the adversary make the system do the wrong thing while leaving the infrastructure pristine? Those are profoundly different security models. The first has a crime scene. The second may leave no forensic residue at all, because nothing was broken, everything worked exactly as built, toward an end the builder never intended. This is why the evidence-grounded approaches interest me more than the signal-based ones. A scanner that flags a credential-shaped string is reasoning about appearances. A system that verifies actual execution behavior is reasoning about consequences. As the terrain shifts from compromise to misdirection, appearances will lie more often, and only observed behavior will remain trustworthy. Now, I don't want to leave the impression that the field has surrendered to fog. Some of the most encouraging work here is the quiet, rigorous kind that refuses to let a threat stay anecdotal. The instinct to measure, to take the cost-success lens seriously, and observe that offensive and defensive agents scale under quite different regimes when every reasoning step and tool call is priced. That instinct is the antidote to hype in both directions. It's easy to be alarmed by peak capability under an unlimited budget. It is far more useful to know what an adversary or a defender can actually afford. Likewise, the longitudinal reading of a security bulletin record, with its careful attention to what is being measured, the public advisory, not the latent vulnerability, not the realized compromise, is a model of intellectual honesty we should demand more widely. The discipline of stating what your number is not is where credibility lives. So what should you watch? Watch the boundaries that have historically been trusted by convention: documentation, logs, memory, retrieved context, the humble setup script. Each is being reclassified from passive to active, and our defenses lag that reclassification. Watch whether evaluation continues to migrate from best-case success toward cost-aware, behavior-grounded, consensus-based measurement. The divergence between two vulnerability scanners on identical inventory should teach us permanent humility about single sources of truth. And watch the hardware flaw beneath all of it, because the template-free extraction of leakage contracts reminds us that even at the level of instructions, secrets seep through timing and microarchitecture, regardless of how careful the software above pretends to be. The through line of everything we've discussed is this: security was once a property of things, and it is becoming a property of relationships. That is harder to certify, harder to sell, and considerably more honest. The work that will matter is the work that measures the relationship rather than blessing the thing. That's the signal for today. The noise will keep coming, we'll keep finding what's underneath it. This has been Signal Ahead with Alfred. Until next time.